The hum of overhead lights filled the room steady and low like a machine breathing. The conference table stretched long and polished beneath a row of projection screens showing weather patterns and tactical grids. Rachel Miller stepped inside quietly, the laminated contractor badge on her chest, swaying with each step. She wore plain black cargo pants and a gray zip-up jacket that looked better suited for warehouse inventory than military briefings. Around her uniforms gleamed with rank and ribbons, posture stiff with pride. Conversation dipped the moment she entered, then shifted into that thin-lipped silence where judgment travels faster than words. Someone near the window muttered something about janitorial staff getting lost. A snort followed. Then a louder voice broke through, amused and sharp, asking if she was there to fix the light bulbs or just observe real pilots at work. Rachel didn't flinch. She stood off to the side, notebook in hand, eyes scanning the data on screen, ignoring the murmurs. Colonel Ashcroft, a career pilot with salt and pepper hair and a smirk that rarely softened, leaned back in his chair with folded arms. He turned to the others and said, maybe if she wanted to speak in a room like this, she should try surviving his simulator gauntlet. He gestured with a lazy hand toward the flight bay eyes never quite landing on her. The challenge landed like a punch disguised as a joke. Laughter followed, but it was the kind meant to sting. Someone added that if she made it through the gauntlet, they'd personally walk her off base with a salute and a formal apology. The words hung in the air, daring and mocking all at once. Rachel didn't move. Her face gave away nothing. She looked back at the monitor as if the numbers mattered more than the laughter. The silence stretched a little too long, awkward for them, not for her. The room didn't wait for her to respond. A few men exchanged glances, shaking their heads, smiling like boys at a lunch table who knew exactly where the line was and how to dance around it. She was the outsider, the extra, the one who didn't belong in the photo. A badge without rank, a presence without weight. Still, she didn't leave. She didn't argue. She just turned slightly toward the data feed, making a quiet note with her pen, then tucked the notebook under her arm and exited without a word. Behind her, one of the lieutenants whispered that she probably didn't even know how to log into the system. What they didn't notice was how her fingers had brushed the screen on her way out, how the projector briefly glitched and recalibrated. What they remembered later wasn't her clothes or her silence. It was the first moment they realized they might have been wrong. But that came later. For now she was just a quiet woman in a room full of noise, and nobody thought twice about what she might do next. Part 1. The Quiet Technician. At 4:47 a.m. Rachel Miller opened her eyes 3 minutes before the alarm would buzz. She didn't need sound to wake her anymore. Habit had taken over where willpower used to live. The apartment was small, clean, and quiet just outside the east gate of Holloman Air Base. The floor creaked only near the kitchen, where she stepped lightly in wool socks, careful not to break the silence. She moved through the morning with practiced rhythm. Plain black pants from the drying rack, gray t-shirt folded at the foot of the bed. Utility jacket zipped halfway. Her hair, still damp from the night shower, was tied in a low knot that didn't draw attention. By 5:15, she was locking the door and heading down 2 flights of stairs to her truck. The lot was still dark. The only sounds were a few engines warming and one dog barking behind a fence. She liked the stillness before the base stirred. Inside the gates, the world was bright with fluorescent tubes and metal edges. Rachel moved through hallways like someone who'd done it 1,000 times. Her badge swayed as she walked, the word contractor in all caps beneath her photo. She reached the simulator bay a little before 5:30. The room was quiet, monitors, dark lights on motion sensors that clicked on as she entered. She keyed into the diagnostics lab, her fingers moving with muscle memory across the keypad. 6 Osprey simulators stood in a row, dark giants waiting for breath. Each one was worth more than her apartment building. She approached the first with the calm care of someone who understood systems more than people. Hydraulics, latency, threat response. She checked each module in order, never skipping a step. Her notes were clean logged with timestamps and data strings. She never hurried. She never had to redo anything. Inside her locker, wedged behind a worn manual and a toolkit, was a small photo. It showed a younger Rachel, maybe 20, standing beside her father in front of a real Osprey. They both wore flight suits and the same crooked smile. She rarely looked at the photo now, but she had never taken it down. It was part of the room, like the machines, like the smell of cold metal and dustless air. Her father had flown with the Navy for 19 years. He taught her how to handle a yoke before she learned how to drive. He used to say she was born for sky space, not sidewalk traffic. When she qualified for the pilot program, he cried for the first time she could remember, but the last flight she logged was never supposed to be her last. During her final assessment, someone on the tower radio said it. Not to her, but loud enough. That's why women don't belong in the cockpit. Rachel heard it in her headset like it was gospel. She landed clean. Every metric passed, but she was pulled from flight status 3 days later. They never said it was about that comment. They never had to. 8 years later, she still walked the same hangars, but now she calibrated the simulators for the men who took her seat. They barely noticed her. She didn't speak unless asked. The systems listened, though. They responded to her in ways people didn't. She knew their rhythms, their glitches, their silent warnings. Machines didn't care about rank. They just wanted to work. Rachel took her coffee from a small thermos she kept in her back pocket. She sipped slowly while reviewing a fault flag on Unit 3. It had tripped for 30 milliseconds yesterday, not enough to log automatically, but she caught it. She always caught it. That was her way. Quiet, invisible, unmissable. There were stories about her on base, though no one ever said them to her face. Some thought she had failed out. Others thought she was some kind of lifer stuck in tech purgatory. Nobody knew what she had almost become. And she never corrected them. Not because she didn't care, but because it didn't change anything. At 6:04, she completed her checks. The system lights blinked green in sequence. Another perfect round. Another invisible morning. She slipped the photo back in her locker, tucked behind the manual where it always lived. Her name wasn't on any of the cockpits, but her work kept them in the air. Part 2, The System Always Wins. Sub. Part 2.1, A New Commander. Word traveled fast. By the second week of October, everyone on base knew the new program director had arrived. Colonel Davis, fresh off a strategic command tour overseas, had a reputation for being sharp, strict, and impossible to impress. He walked into the simulator bay like it was a battlefield. Aviators hung from his collar, his voice clipped, and he rarely spoke unless it was to correct something. Rachel first saw him during a calibration run, his silhouette moving behind the glass wall as he surveyed the room, like a general sizing up a quiet rebellion. Within 48 hours, changes began rolling through the system. Enemy drones appeared earlier. Storm conditions triggered faster. Simulated threats acted outside documented protocols. Rachel ran diagnostics twice, then a third time. The numbers weren't wrong. The simulations were. She flagged the shift quietly in her logs. The training programs no longer aligned with field behavior. Latency buffers shrank to below manufacturer specs. A full throttle roll was coded to fail before the pilot even had time to react. She didn't speak up at first. She was used to keeping her thoughts to herself. But after 3 days of parameter anomalies, she submitted a note through internal systems suggesting a review for safety compliance. Nothing dramatic, just a flag. On the fourth morning, she was calibrating Osprey Unit 4 when she heard the click of boots behind her. She didn't need to turn. The air changed when he walked in. It always did. His voice came sharp and low, cutting through the hum of the machines. Who authorized these adjustments? Rachel straightened eyes on the screen posture. Calm. She explained the updates were in line with the new simulation files logged under Protocol 79A. Targeting lag was adjusted to match the latest field data. She had cross-checked it twice. Colonel Davis stepped closer, peering at the numbers with a tight jaw. His tone dropped but held its bite. And you would know this how? You're a civilian contractor, a technician. You plug in wires and update drivers. You don't get to decide what makes a system combat ready. Rachel held her ground. I don't decide, she said. I follow the data. Her voice didn't shake, but it took effort to keep it that way. He reached past her, rolled back the sensitivity manually, and said there, now it's usable. Then he looked at her as if evaluating not her work, but her presence. Stick to light bulbs, Ms. Miller. Let the real aviators handle the systems. 2 instructors watched from across the room but didn't say a word. Rachel nodded once, lips tight, back straight. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. The damage had already been done. She waited until he left. Then she logged the override in her record, noting it as unauthorized. She stared at the screen for a full minute before resuming her checks. The room had gone quiet. Not the peaceful kind. the kind that sticks to your skin like static. Rachel didn't say anything to the others, but her hands moved slower than usual that morning. Something had shifted, and not just in the system. Sub-Part 2.2, the breaking point. The room was too bright when she walked in. Overhead, fluorescence buzzed faintly, casting a cold light across the polished floor. Rachel stood alone near the center table, her badge clipped neatly, her posture still. Two others were already there, a compliance officer with a clipboard and a woman from HR, her expression unreadable. Colonel Davis entered last, walking like he had somewhere better to be. There was no greeting, no context, no time to breathe. He called it sabotage. He said she had altered a simulator scenario after it had been reviewed and approved. Rachel answered quietly. She said the scenario was out of spec, unsafe. She had restored it to baseline, nothing more. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't try to defend herself beyond the facts. Davis didn't want facts. He wanted control. He said she wasn't authorized to override the program, that she had violated multiple codes under the Technical Operations Handbook. She noticed then that he was holding something. Her badge. She hadn't even realized it was missing from her desk. He held it up like a piece of evidence, as if it were proof of something shameful. "This says technician," he told her. "Not engineer, not pilot, not decision maker." Then he dropped it into a plain white envelope stamped with her name and the words, "temporary suspension." He said the command believed her behavior suggested unresolved psychological issues tied to her previous discharge. Until cleared, she was barred from all technical systems and simulator access. Nobody spoke. Not the compliance officer, not the HR rep, not the two junior instructors who had wandered in from the hall and now stood awkwardly near the back wall. Rachel nodded once. She didn't argue. She couldn't trust her voice not to break. She took the envelope with both hands. It felt heavier than it looked. Paper and plastic should not feel like grief, but somehow it did. The silence followed her as she stepped out of the room. Even the janitor in the hallway paused, unsure if he should make eye contact. He didn't. Outside, the sun was climbing over the tarmac. Helicopter blades glinted in the distance, catching morning light. Rachel stood still for a long time on the steps, envelope pressed against her ribs like something fragile. She remembered the first time she had been told she wasn't ready. Different words. Same message. This time there were no flight suits to return, just a name removed from a system she once helped build. She walked slowly to her truck, not because she was tired, but because she didn't know what to do next. No one followed. No one called after her. When she pulled out of the lot, no one even looked up. The base was already moving on. That was the part that hurt most. Not the badge, not the insult. The quiet way people let you disappear. Part 3. The Hidden Pilot. The door to the east wing was marked with no label, just a keypad and a silent camera tucked beneath the frame. Rachel had never been inside this part of the base. She followed Major Brian Ellis without asking questions. He didn't explain, just nodded for her to come. The hallway beyond was dim and narrow, the kind of place that didn't appear on floor plans. At the end was another door, heavier built, like it had something worth protecting. When it opened, she stepped into what looked like a bunker for machines that needed to be left alone. Glass walls lined the space screens everywhere, each one flickering with telemetry and flight data. No sound, just the constant stream of numbers moving across dark monitors. In the center, one screen stood still, frozen mid-flight topography, lit up in blue and green contours. Brian stood beside it, arms folded, expression unreadable. He pointed at the screen without looking at her. Said the Pentagon had flagged this run last week. Classified protocols. No pilot ID. Codename was just X. The scenario was designed to fail. Mountain corridor collapsing, visibility, wind shears stacked on descent. No one had completed it. Until this. He hit play. The footage rolled forward, trim controls shifting at the last possible second, lift modulation reacting before the terrain even showed up. It wasn't just precision. It was rhythm. Rachel watched in silence. She didn't try to deny it. After a long pause, she said the words quietly. "It was me." Brian didn't turn. He just kept watching the screen. Then asked how. How did she fly it like that? Rachel exhaled slowly, told him about her father, about the early mornings, the notebooks, the way he taught her things no one else put in manuals. He helped draft those protocols when the Osprey was still in development. They practiced in empty fields, wind tunnels, flight sims she built from scrap and memory. After she was discharged, she kept training. Every night, every chance. She spoke with no pride, no need to impress. Just facts. Years of effort distilled into 3 steady sentences. Brian finally turned, looking at her like she was no longer someone he almost overlooked. He picked up a printout from the table, showed her the flight log with Pilot X circled in red, said they thought it came from a senior Black Ops flyer testing the system. But it was her. No squadron. No backup. No approval. Rachel didn't apologize. She didn't explain further. She just let it sit there like the truth it had always been. Brian leaned against the desk and went quiet. The air felt different. Not heavy. Just still. Then he said it. You didn't just fly it. You solved it. The words settled slowly like dust after a long silence. For the first time in years, Rachel felt seen, not admired, not praised, just recognized for what she had always been. He said he wanted her to run a new scenario. Tomorrow night, no records, no witnesses, just her and the system. She didn't ask why. He didn't ask for permission. He just knew. Rachel nodded, not because she needed the chance, but because it was already hers. This was never about proving anything. It was about finally being allowed back into the air, even if it was just behind a screen. The sim stayed on loop after she left. Brian stood there longer than he meant to, eyes still on the flight path. Every movement she made had left a trail. Every trail told the same story. This wasn't a technician trying to pretend. This was a pilot who never stopped flying. Part 4. When the storm hit sub. Part 4.1. The crisis. The first call came in just after 1900 hours. A routine training flight had gone silent over the Guadalupe Range. The storm had moved faster than forecast, turning high clouds into freezing rain and killing visibility over the peaks. By 1930, Command realized it wasn't a drill anymore. A field unit of 24 soldiers was stranded in a narrow canyon with no way out. The retrieval craft had lost altitude control and returned before completing the pickup. Within the hour, tension across the operations floor thickened. Screens showed wind vectors climbing past 80 knots. Ice warnings flashed along the projected flight corridor. One by one, cleared pilots stepped into the simulator to run the route. One by one, they failed. Stall alerts, terrain, impact system loss. Even the best couldn't finish it. The scenario had been designed as a worst-case drill. Now it was the only available map to get them out. Someone asked about alternate airframes. Another checked satellite overlays. The canyon was too tight, the storm too unstable. They needed the Osprey, and no one could fly it through that mess. Brian Ellis stood off to the side, jaw-tight eyes fixed on the scrolling data. He didn't speak until the last pilot was pulled from the sim. Then he stepped forward and called up a file from the secured archive. Flight analysis. Scenario X. Operator ID redacted. The screen lit up with a perfect run, no collisions, no system fails, extraction complete. The room went silent. He said one sentence. This has already been flown. They asked who. He didn't answer at first, just replayed the terrain footage. Then he turned to Command. She's the only one who made it. Her name is Rachel Miller. The reaction was instant. Voices rose. She's not active. She's not cleared. She's a contractor. Brian didn't flinch. He said it again, steady and low. She's the only one who can do it. A lieutenant threw out protocol numbers. An airspace controller cited chain of command. But none of them could erase the data on the screen. No one else had finished that route. No one had come close. The base commander asked if this was a joke. Brian replied without blinking. I've seen her fly it. You've seen the outcome. You want those soldiers back or not? Another beat passed. Then someone from the back of the room spoke up. We're out of time. Every minute we wait is another drop in core temperature. The decision came faster than anyone expected. Authorization granted. No press, no announcement, just a direct line to Rachel's phone. Brian stepped out without waiting for more discussion. He didn't need to convince them. The storm had already done that. The only question left was whether she'd say yes. But he already knew. She'd been ready for years. Subpart 4.2, The Rescue. The storm was waiting. Clouds moved like walls, collapsing in slow motion, swallowing peaks and dropping sheets of ice across the airfield. The Osprey sat at the edge of the hangar engines, spooling blades slicing the dark. Rachel stood alone beside the machine. Her helmet rested against her side, her gloves already on. She didn't say anything as she walked toward the ramp. No salute, no call sign, just her breath and the storm. Inside the cockpit, her hands moved without pause. Switches flipped. Lights blinked green. She settled into the seat like it had always been hers because it had. They just forgot. Command called once asked for final confirmation. She clicked in, said she was ready. Then the hatch sealed behind her and the Osprey lifted into wind. The air hit like a hammer. Turbulence slammed the frame, pushing against every angle. Ice spread across the windshield in spidering patterns. Rachel adjusted trim, dropped below radar ceiling, eyes steady. Below, jagged terrain flashed on the HUD. Wind shear readings flared red. The canyon was tighter than forecast. She didn't hesitate. Every move came from memory. Visibility dropped to 40 feet. She trusted the sensors, trusted her instincts more. The rotors screamed as she pivoted through a narrow pass. Alarms chirped. She ignored them. 12 figures came into view on thermal. Clustered on a snowy ridge, flares dying out. She dipped lower, the Osprey hovering just long enough for them to scramble aboard. Frost clung to their jackets as they piled in, faces wide with disbelief. Command told her to hold. Fuel low. Weather worsening. Abort recommended. Rachel answered in a voice barely above a whisper. They called for me. She turned the Osprey toward the ridge again. The wind didn't give her a second chance. It shifted without warning, catching the hull and shoving her toward the rock wall. She countered with a side drift maneuver, blades inches from stone. The second extraction was rougher. The final 12 moved slower limbs, stiff, oxygen thin. She didn't wait. She lifted before the last harness clicked. She could feel the weight, could feel the aircraft fighting her. The return was worse. Downdrafts cut into her lift margin. Icing alerts flared again. Fuel blinked red. Still, she held her course. Every simulation she had ever run lived in her hands now. The Osprey touched down on the base runway at 4:26 a.m. The engines sputtered once, then again before powering down. Rotors slowed, steam rising from the frame as cold air met heat. She sat still for a moment. Helmet in her lap, breathing level, hands steady. The cockpit lights dimmed around her like a curtain falling. When she stepped off the ramp, her boots left wet tracks across the floor. No music played, no sirens, just silence. Then one of the soldiers clapped, another joined, then more. It wasn't loud. It didn't have to be. The sound filled the hangar like something sacred. Rachel didn't speak. She didn't smile. She walked past them, steady and calm. They had forgotten her name. Now they couldn't forget what she'd done. Part 5. The Aftermath. The conference room had no windows. Just a long table, 12 chairs, and recessed lights that buzzed faintly above. Screens lined the walls, each filled with telemetry logs, flight data, and performance metrics from the rescue mission. The Pentagon review team sat in silence as the footage played. The Osprey curved through impossible terrain, every movement precise, every maneuver surgical. Someone finally leaned forward and asked the question everyone had been circling. Whose stick was that? Brian Ellis stood beside the main display, hands clasped behind him. He answered simply, Pilot X. No squadron assignment, no enhancements. Real-time sim training, flown without official clearance. The Navy rep frowned. He said it wasn't possible. No active-duty pilot had cleared that canyon in sim, much less under real storm pressure. Brian didn't flinch. He said they were right. It wasn't one of theirs. It was flown by a contractor, a technician, name's Rachel Miller. Chairs shifted. A few brows lifted. No one spoke for several seconds. Then Colonel Davis cleared his throat. He said there had been a misunderstanding, that Rachel had accessed systems without approval, that she wasn't certified, that her actions, while technically successful, had put command at risk. Brian let him speak. Then he pulled up a second file. Rachel's original calibration reports, notes logged before any modifications, sim performance flagged as out of spec, all ignored, all accurate. He said if Rachel hadn't restored that system in secret, one of the base's best trainees would have washed out on a broken module. He paused. Let that sit. Then he pointed out that when no one else could complete the mission, she did. Alone. There was no more argument. The numbers made it plain. By the next morning, Rachel was summoned to Base HQ. She walked into the same hallway where she had once been erased. This time people looked up, saluted, held doors open. No one said much, but their silence had changed. Inside the operations room, 3 senior officers waited. Colonel Davis was not among them. Word had already spread. His access had been revoked. He left the base just before sunrise. No ceremony. No farewell. Rachel stood in front of the panel with her hands loosely folded. They listed her options one by one. Full reinstatement. Rank restored with backdated promotion. A leadership role in training command. She listened quietly. Another officer offered a role in Washington. Federal advisor for rotary wing strategy. Another mentioned test pilot status at Horizon Aerospace. Elite clearance. Her own team. She nodded once, then said she appreciated every offer. But she wasn't there to climb above a system that once pushed her out. She was there to make sure no one else got buried by it. There was no applause, no speeches, just a long pause. Then one officer stood and said she understood. The others followed. By noon, her access credentials were restored, but she didn't log into the simulators right away. She walked back to the old bay, slow and steady, her boots clicking softly on the tile. Her badge still read, Contractor. But when she walked through the door, the text stood a little straighter. The instructors nodded. One even called her ma'am. It wasn't pride she carried. It was something heavier. A sense of returning to a place that once tried to forget her. Not to demand anything, but to hold the door open for whoever came next. The simulator bay looked different in the morning light. The walls, once quiet and cold, hummed with energy as a new class filled the room. Their voices rose and fell, full of nerves and questions, the kind of sound Rachel hadn't heard in years. She stood behind the glass of the observation platform, watching rows of young trainees work through their first flight sequences. Monitors flickered with data scenarios running smoother, now cleaner. The recalibrated systems she had once fought to fix were now the standard. One simulator caught her eye. A young woman, maybe 20, with dark curls pulled back in a rushed braid. She sat stiffly at the controls, hands a little too tight, eyes locked on the HUD. She wasn't getting it right, but she wasn't giving up. Rachel watched her run the sequence twice, then again. The crosswind rotation always threw her off on final approach. Each time she reset with a small exhale and tried again. Rachel walked down from the platform without saying a word. The sound of her boots on the floor was soft, familiar. She stopped beside the simulator just as the young woman reached to restart again. The trainee looked up, startled. Her expression flickered from confusion to embarrassment. She started to rise to clear the seat, but Rachel held up a hand and said she was exactly where she needed to be. The girl hesitated, then nodded slowly. Rachel reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a small patch. The fabric was worn, the stitching faded, but intact. The emblem read, Falcon, the same call sign her father once wore, the same one that had sat in her drawer all these years. She placed it in the girl's hands, steady and deliberate. Said it belonged to the man who taught her to fly. Said he always believed the most important thing wasn't rank or speed or how clean the landing was. It was bringing them home. That's what mattered. The girl held the patch like it meant something sacred. Rachel gave a quiet smile and stepped back, letting the trainee settle in again. The simulator lights blinked, the engine sim roared back to life, and the girl tried once more. Rachel walked to the far side of the bay, watching as the rest of the class followed their instructors to the next module. There was a rhythm to it now. The system moved differently, with care, with space. Outside the hangar, a line of aircraft waited on the tarmac, their rotors catching sunlight as the breeze rolled in. A new day beginning, just like the one she had once walked into alone. Her flight helmet was back in its case. Her nameplate hadn't changed. But she didn't need to fly again to prove anything. She had already written herself into every scenario, every protocol, every lesson. She stood with her hands in her pockets, watching the next generation lift off from the same ground that once tried to bury her. The system hadn't broken her. It had revealed her. And now, in the rising hum of the simulator, she heard something new. Not her name. Not applause. Just a quiet echo of the same words that had carried her through everything. Bring them home. That was all she ever wanted. Now someone else would carry that forward, and she was exactly where she needed to be.